All right. And welcome back to TLDR. I'm your friendly neighborhood backcracker, Dr. Joe. With me, as always, is my hunk in crime, Nick. I am under the weather. I am not feeling it, but you know what? Jordan played with the flu, and damn it, I'll podcast with one. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing great, and you sound and look outstanding. So I
Oh,
don't know
thank
what it
you.
is you're talking about. In the book you're talking about today, I'm very excited about doing a mainline episode, first time in a long while, and actually, we're getting really close to doing for those who don't remember, maybe new to the show, doing a trade, which we haven't done. Joe actually did a check on this. Was it 6 months since our last
Yeah,
trade?
October 8th was the
Which when this show started, it was going to be a regular every 10 days we would end up doing every 10 weeks, excuse me, we would
10
end up
weeks,
doing a
yeah.
trade. So been a long time, a little bit overdue on that front. And if you are new to the show, make sure you go subscribe, rate the show wherever you're listening to our podcast. Make sure you tell a fellow dork too. You can find us on Apple, what is it? Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music. Tell a dork, tell a nerd, whoever you know that reads comics. Let them know because they're going to enjoy this. We bring a lot of different stuff to the show. Today we're doing mainline stuff. We've done, of course, a lot of interviews recently. Today, though, Joe, we want to start things off talking about Moon Knight. Of course, we got our second episode of it. And how do you feel about it so far?
So we threw a tic tac up, last week about
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
about should because we talked about this last week where does one just wait until the season's over so they can binge it all at once, or do you wait week to week? And this show is so good, Nick. I want it all now. I hate that I have to
Okay.
wait week to week. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't want to have to wait the 6 weeks to then have to binge it all at once. uh but at the same time, like, I would very heavily consider doing so because so we've only had 2 episodes so far, but they're so involved and they're so engaging, that I just want to keep watching. I
Okay.
just want the story to keep going. So episode 2, again, like, there's something about Moon Knight where, like, not a lot happens, but everything happens at the
Mm-hmm.
same time.
Well, and then that's where we talk about character work on this show a lot. You talk about that even more so than I do, as important as it is to me. But when we talk about Moon Knight, that like you don't talk about his villains over the years or all the supporting characters that he's dealt with as much as we've seen him do stuff with some of the bigger names in Marvel. Talk about like how wild of a character he is on his own. And that just it's the strength of the writing around him. I'm not saying he's always been written great over the years, but right now we're seeing that where like we're just immensely interested in this character because he's so different from everybody else that we see in Marvel, and he's just dynamic on his own. We're like, yeah, you want to see the plot move forward, but it's like there's just so much to unpack with this guy, and for so many people, it's like he's a new character. They just don't know anything about him. And even for me, they're changing so much with the character in a good way. I do like what they did with Mr. Knight. I think it threw me off for a second, but in general, like I think for a lot of people where it's a new character to them, it's a little bit easier to utilize Mr. Knight in that way than they had in the comics.
Yeah, and for those like myself who are very unfamiliar with the character, I thought this episode was great because it told you, it gave you a lot more about sort of who the character of Moon Knight is and some of his history, and they did it in a way that wasn't like bogged down or overly, didn't have to be overly explained. They sort of weaved in, the character of Moon Knight and how he can possess, I'm spacing on the god's name, but how he can possess different people over time, and or they become his avatars, I should say.
Mm.
And I thought that was done really well, and I'm glad they sort of did that in this episode, not the first episode, because you got to learn a little bit about Steven and Mark, right?
Yeah.
Even though you don't really know his name, you're learning about the human aspect of Moon Knight there, and getting a much better understanding. And then we get more of that plus the overarching stuff. I thought was excellent.
I'm so glad that I now have clarification on Khonshu's name because that has been a big
Yes,
thing for me
there
as
we
a
go.
reader.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, over the years, it's been a big thing for me where it's like, I think it's Khonshu, but I'm not certain. So
Right.
now we know. But I've had it right since day one.
There
That's
you go.
huge. Very happy about that. But yeah, all around this has been like very well paced. It's been very weird, and that's what you want from Moon Knight. But they've like where we've seen other books over the years that get translated into a show or a movie, not necessarily from Marvel, but kind of more outside of that, where things can get weird. Sometimes they don't lean into the weirdness the right way where it's going to be recepted well by a larger audience. And on the one I think of specifically is David Harbour's Hellboy, because that, like, when I read the comics and like look at what they did on the big screen, it's like, okay, I can kind of see what you're going for in respecting to the comics and everything. But now it's like, it's just a big miss. Like, you
Yeah.
got to make adjustments like they did with the Perlman one. So that one worked over the years, obviously. But anyways, hopefully Hellboy, that's another story for another day. But anyways, Joe, let's get to catching up before we get into what's new this week.
So I didn't have a ton. As I said earlier, I've been a little under the weather, and so reading has sort of been the last thing I've wanted to do. But I caught out on AWA's Out, number 5, the series finale for that.
Yep.
I thought that was a good series. I feel like it wanted to be a couple of different things, and it just didn't quite, find its footing. Overall, I thought it was good, but it's not like one of the top AWA books for me.
The art in that series, because I finished that on time, that the art in that series was absolutely
Oh,
top notch.
100%, 100%.
The story, though, you're right. I think when you text me, you finished it, you put it best. Like, it's a lot of things and it doesn't know exactly what it wants to be in the course
Yeah,
of it all.
because
So
there was good stories. It just, I don't know. It felt like it was just kind of going in a couple of different directions,
yeah,
and then
way too much at
the
once.
way it ended, like I felt it could have been a little bit more linear.
Hmm.
And then I read Crimson Cage, number 4.
Hmm.
And Nicholas, I'm going to tell you what, it was the first on this show where I've read a book
Uh-huh.
before it's finished,
Mm.
and as soon as I read issue 4, not only did I tweet about it immediately, but I said I got to do it on the show. I
Hmm.
can't wait. And maybe it was because I'm coming off of, it was WrestleMania weekend, and I had just been to the AEW
Mm.
show that was here
That's
in
right.
Boston, and I had wrestling fever. But that issue, I mean, this whole series has been great, but that issue in particular, maybe, want to jump the gun. Now, we are lucky that we get, advanced review copies. So I do
Mm.
know how it ends.
Mm.
So, 100% it's worthy of the show. But I knew that after reading the first issue. But that's an absolute first for me, where I said, I'm going to talk about a book before, it's finished. And this episode was absolutely crackers. And then, the last book that I had to catch up on was Red Sonja 7, which I believe came out last week and or the week before. And again, like, I've never read this character before, but Mirka Andolfo, it's just, it made me fall in love with
Yeah.
Red Sonja. It's fucking awesome.
I'm excited for you to talk about Red Sonja on here, but I'm really excited to hear more about Crimson Cage today because you've been on this from day one, and I've said to you from day one, like, I'm not a wrestling guy, you know this, and it's just that's not something I'd be invested in as much as the story itself does sound interesting. So I'm hoping to give this a shot afterwards because you're gonna have to do a little convincing on my end though because the wrestling is just as much as I've tried, it's just not my thing. As for me, caught up on Spawns or up to 328. I was behind on the last couple issues. Joe, I know you haven't been reading it, but like for me, Spawn is always going to be an important book for me to read, but at the same time, it is number 4 on the Spawn Power Rankings right now. There's no two ways about it. So I'm caught up on all the other ones every week. This one is the one that's kind of suffered. And of course, there's a lot of other stuff to read.
I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not getting Spawn fatigue. I'm loving the Spawn books that I'm reading, but I'm starting to get all the stories muddled
Yeah,
a
well,
little bit,
yep, and I
you know.
think, that's totally well. There isn't like a definitive timeline on some of these. They do mention it here and there, so it can get confusing at times. To me, like Spawn is obviously Spawn, its own definitive thing, and I think they did acknowledge some timeline stuff in like 328. But I'm looking at King Spawn as like the definitive book that's out there for Spawn
Oh,
right now.
100%.
Yeah, 100%. And when it comes to the Scorch, I mean, when we talked to Sean about it, we already kind of got to feel like it's just going to be like a good time. Like, sure, you're going to
Yeah.
have like a plot and everything to it, and they're going to be working towards things, but like it's going to be about the action. It's going to be about the craziness, letting these characters kind of, the artists kind of go crazy with them and everything. And then Gunslinger, like to me, that's more about getting to know that character a little bit better, and as opposed to the plot where like King Spawn, it's like now we're getting like some epic, like you've gotten some epic Spawn stories over the years, don't get me wrong, but like this is some next level shit. So like that's where, to me, like when I'm looking at plot, like that is the one that I'm reading into most 100% is King Spawn. Also picked up a couple other first issues last week. Of course, the Joneses from AWA came out. Cult of Icarus from Scout. I don't know if this came out last week. I feel like I'm a little behind on this one, but I gave this one a look as well. Solid first issue. I think I'll go and take a look at the second one too. It's like you're dealing with some vampire stuff. Of course, Lord knows we get enough vampire things, but kind of like punk rock stuff too, which of course is going to interest me a little bit. But the big book that we didn't get to talk about last week that I wanted to touch on is Alice Ever After, issue 1 from Boom by Dan Panosian and Giorgio Spalletta. And dude, like you wanted to give this one a look before I did, and then I ended up doing it. It's friggin' awesome. First issue, absolutely loved it.
Do you want dibs?
You know what? Yes, I want
Okay.
dibs.
Okay.
I'm gonna call dibs on this one.
Okay, I've got the first issue upstairs, but I haven't read it yet, so I will hold off.
All right, so we'll see. I will update you, of course, on the second issue.
I gave you dibs on a Boom book, Nicholas. This is a big day. It's a big day for TLDR.
Crap, you're right. That's huge. But basically, with this book, for those who don't want to wait, like Doc, unfortunately, is going to have to now. This starts with like it's Alice from Alice in Wonderland, post Wonderland, and obviously Alice in Wonderland over the years has been like made out to be this thing that's kind of more about drug use and everything like that. And I can't remember if it's like acid or whatever it is, but Alice is basically going on a trip, right? Well, this is at least where I'm at now. It's like she did go to Wonderland, but now the only way she gets back to Wonderland is by tripping on shit. So it's like it's an interest. It's a really interesting first issue. And so she's got some a-holes in her family and everything. So very excited after that
this
one.
book sounded awesome. I'm kind of regretting giving it dibs, but I did. So maybe we'll good Asian this. We'll see.
Oh wow! Well, I already read it at least. See, Good Asian, I called, and then I still haven't read the first issue yet because
there we go.
Yeah, so I could see that happening.
And that's wrapping up soon, so I'm looking forward to talking about that.
I am looking forward to hearing about that one from you as well. Really big time. That one's going to be a fun episode. Yeah. But we got to talk Crimson Cage today too, in my book as well. Before we do that, let's get to what's new, Joe. We'll kick things off with Marvel. So X-Men 10, of course, what you're reading. I am well behind on that one right now. Darth Vader 22. Of course, you're reading that as well. We have Venom 7, Star Wars 22, Eternals 11, Black Panther 5, Captain Carter 2. And then a couple ones that I'm reading. We got Elektra 100. Of course, it's a pretty monumental issue, kind of a standalone thing. But you do get like for the main story, but you get like 3 or 4 backup stories, something with Daredevil, and then, kind of a goofy thing with like Daredevil, Black Panther, Iron Fist, Elektra, and Bullseye, like a kidsy kind of like comic strip, and then another one with Punisher. So a lot of different stuff. I think something with Reed Richards at one point too. So just kind of a celebration of the character from over the years. So I enjoyed that. If you like Elektra, I would say pick that up. The big one, though, was X-Men 92, House of XCII, which I found out in Roman numerals. That is 92. Should have figured.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, didn't know that.
On the nose.
Yep. The first issue of that came out. So, of course, I talked about the X-Men 92 series a little while back on the show. I can't remember which issue it was, Joe, but this is set in that time. But basically, you're putting the Krakoa story there and making some modifications to it. And I, reading the synopsis and everything, like, look, it's X-Men 92. I'm going to give it a look. It doesn't matter who's writing it or who's drawing it. But when I see the synopsis, I can't tell if it's like there's like a time travel component to it and it's linking to the other stuff, or that's what I thought. Find out, no, that's not what it is. Just if Krakoa and all that happened in the X-Men 92 era, which kind of threw me off early on at first. I didn't know that. So, so for me, I think I gave it around like an 8.5 score, maybe like an 8, somewhere in that range. Definitely not more than 8.5, because it was just like that threw me off. So for some people, hearing us reading the review beforehand, not going to bug you as much. For me though, it was just like, I can't fully, like, I just didn't know till like halfway through the story, something to that, and like later than I would have liked. Kind of just slowed me down. So that's it from Marvel for us this week, though. We got DC Batcat 11, which of course your favorite book. Batman 89 issue 5. Batman Urban Legends issue 14. Batgirls issue 5. I Am Batman 8. You Are Batman 8. Future State Gotham issue 12.
I'm Batman.
So that's your Batman voice. That's first. That's your okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna film it. My apologies.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Suicide Squad Blaze issue 2, which heard the first issue was great. Might give this one a look. Naomi season 2 issue 2. Then we got Superman Son of Kal-El issue 10, which you've been reading that. Then we got two other books that you and I wanted to highlight a little bit more. Why don't you kick us off with Sandman Universe Nightmare Country issue 1.
Yeah, this should be called Sandman Universe Nightmare Fuel number
Oh,
1.
yeah.
Holy shit, Nicholas.
Yeah.
Holy shit. So this was written by Tynan.
It was
and
Tynan. Okay, yep.
Yeah, and can you pull up the artist for me real
Yep,
quick?
I will. Yep, you go ahead.
Because it was I'm reading this and I was reading it midday yesterday actually. And man, I had to like put it down a couple of times because the artwork was so fucked up.
Okay, so if I'm pronouncing the writer's name wrong, I apologize.
There's a couple of artists too. Yep.
Lisandro Esterin,
Yep.
and then the
Yep.
colorist is Patricio Del Pecci.
And I believe there was a guest artist in there for a couple of for a couple of pages.
Yannick Paquette and
Yep.
Nathan Fairbairn.
So, oh man, just like, I mean, it is straight nightmare fuel. The story,
Mm,
was classic Tynan, actually, just wonderfully paced. The suspense builds like there's layers to his storytelling, and where you
mhm,
start the book and where you end the book. I mean, but really, like, it's the artwork that
mhm.
that steals the fucking show here. And although it's not my favorite art style, it is very haunting,
Yeah.
very, very nightmarish. I mean, there's I don't even want to give it away because I want people to read it and see. Like, you'll know when you see the image of this one character,
Mhm,
and and actually just two characters, but like it's the eyes, it's the
hmm.
fucked up shit that's drawn in the eyes. Man, like I didn't know what to expect from this, and I didn't expect this, and it
Mm.
absolutely fucking terrified me, Nicholas.
Good. I love to hear that. Okay, I'm all in on this. And
I mean,
I
this
wasn't
this
sure.
might be one of the most like for me, this is a personal thing. I know this is not going to be like the scariest thing for maybe a lot of people, but for
Mm.
me, like I don't know, there was just something about it, and like
Well,
really kind of fucked me up a bit.
I really hope what doesn't happen to you is that in the course of, you're trying to go to sleep at night, that you don't see something that's going to make you think you're seeing a pair of eyes in the dark in your house that would be akin to one of these characters, because that would be terrible if something like that happened to you and you couldn't sleep for a night. That's
Yeah,
so
well,
awful.
thankfully I've been jacked up on NyQuil, so
Okay. Then I'll make sure that I remind you that I
thank
hope
you.
that doesn't happen to you
I
when you're off the
appreciate
NyQuil.
that
Yeah, of
prick.
course. But for me, so that was a book that I was a little apprehensive about giving a shot, because like this is gaming stuff, and like we're not seeing Gaiman do it. Okay, then like, I mean, no disrespect to Tynan, but like, when I see someone like Gaiman doing it beforehand, it's like, okay, can Tynan improve on it? Can he kind of build what in any capacity? So
I wouldn't say, Tynan improved on it, and I wouldn't say Tynan didn't do it justice. I would say Tynan did what Tynan does.
good.
And that's right. And that's tell a really good story with like the title suggests, Sandman Universe, right?
Hmm.
So like the story of Sandman and everything that Gaiman's created, there can be so much there, like the paths and the avenues you can go down. And so Tynan just sort of stepped into this world and created his story that was just pure nightmare fuel.
Okay, and
And
I'm very excited. I'm not
yeah,
familiar with Lissandro Theron's artwork either, so I'm very excited to see
like I said,
this.
it's not my favorite style,
Mm.
but it is haunting as fuck.
With horror stories, even more so than like action adventure stuff, I'm much more inclined to be like, I don't, it doesn't need to be my kind of style, like, because a lot of times it's just like, does it reflect the vibes of that book that you're writing
Yeah,
this book with?
facts. Yeah,
That's all that
true,
matters.
true, true. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, don't get me wrong. The art if can definitely take me out of it,
Uh-huh.
100%. But I
Yes.
think you are right with horror. whereas that it is, as Gu would say, macabre. And
Mm,
so when the art style is a little more off the beaten path and a little more, again, like out of your comfort zone, or
right.
I think it just adds to it. And
I
there was
agree.
a viciousness with this art, and there was some mildly sadistic about it as well.
Okay. Now I'm gonna offer to you. Do you
Sorry,
want?
now that I remember, 3 characters now. That really fucked me up.
Do you want dibs?
I do not want tips. You
Okay.
can go ahead because I don't know
Thank
how
you.
much longer I could actually read this before it really starts to fuck with my head.
Oh, I love that. So the book from DC this week that I wanted to weigh in on a little bit was Flashpoint Beyond issue 0. And I've said it before on this show a few times. Like, I want more Thomas Wayne Batman. Mess around with that, even if that means we're gonna go into Black Label stuff or whatever. But we're not getting that. We're not in Black Label here. But this is Thomas Wayne. This is some dark shit. And it is like connecting to like the larger DC stuff on the whole. But as someone who's like kind of we don't talk about events. We talk about them here and there on the show, but they can be a little bit frustrating. They can be exhausting at times when they're too big. And a lot of the stuff that happened with DC, I know some people liked some of the stuff that DC did afterwards, after Future State, but we've expressed like there have been some semblance of frustrations on our end, and we want to just stick to certain titles instead of going crazy into that one, into another event or some of this Elseworld stuff that's there. And with this, like, this is the Flashpoint world. We're familiar with this. We've seen some of this stuff before. This is a character I want, and I know Thomas Wayne was involved in some other like Justice League type stuff recently, and I wasn't reading that. But here, I look at this and I say, okay, well, like now we're getting more actual Batman, Batman Flashpoint stuff, more Thomas Wayne stuff. I got to give it a shot. And I thought this opening issue was rock solid. I would not say it like exceeded my expectations. I would say it met them, and it was good. The art, and if you could look up the artist for me on this one, Joe, the art on this one was also good. None of it like blew me away. The art was consistent and everything, but it wasn't like, and maybe this more has to do with the colors, but it wasn't. It did get dark at times, but there's a certain image of Thomas Wayne's Batman that I have. And I think it's that card, like it's that cover that Todd McFarlane had with like his action figure that he made, that I own, that I got a little while back. But anyways,
Eduardo Rizzo.
Eduardo Russo, thank you. So rock solid first issue, or 0 issue, whatever you want to call it. I will definitely give the next one a look. And then I'll check in from there. But I can't like commit beyond that just yet. But I'm excited. Like this is what I want. Like some more Thomas Wayne stuff. The narration throughout all this was really good. Actually, no, I could probably commit to the 3rd issue with this one. The story was really good. Like the art was like solid. That's where it kind of like lacked a little bit, but between the two things. But yeah, so Flashpoint Beyond, Thomas Wayne stuff. If you've been itching for that, pick this issue up and give it a look. Then we move over to Image, where pretty big week. Image always has like a few good titles every week. Of course, we say that a bunch, but it's been a while since we've had like a crazy week from Image, and that's just the bar's a little bit different for them right now, because when it comes to the best stories, like it's them. Like there's no two ways about it. From them, we got Nocterra 9,
Oh.
which that got pretty freaking messed up this issue. I mean, Blacktop Bill and everything is really really pushing it. We got King Spawn 9,
which is awesome.
and then we got 3 other books that we want to weigh in on. Let's start with we got 2 first issues. One is anthology Image, which is a celebration of 30 years of Image Comics, which I'll just say quickly on this one. The only one I've read so far is Shift, which is the art's by Daniel Dinoculo, which we're going to talk about another he's working on. And of course, Kyle Higgins is writing that. Gives us a little background into the Shift character, who we've seen in Radiant Red, and I believe we've seen in Radiant Black now as well. And I'll tell you what, this guy is definitely an asshole. There are no two ways about it, and I am very interested in seeing him more involved in the Radiant Black Massiverse.
So I gotta read this, because I mean we've ranted. I mean, not ranted. We have raved about 7 Secrets.
Yep.
And Danielle Dinaculo's art in that.
Mm.
I feel as though like he needs to do more Radiant Black stuff. because I feel like he's perfect for that universe.
Yeah, I agree.
His art style's perfect for it.
Yeah, his stuff is really awesome. And I gotta imagine they're gonna try and have him do some more coming out with Seven Secrets wrapping up for him. But I don't know. I would think his brand's gonna be pretty hot coming off of working with Tom Taylor and everything. But we'll see. But yeah, this was a great, like, I'm gonna go back and look at some of the other ones from this anthology, but this was a great first one. I think there's gonna be 4 chapters to this. This particular story, the Shift one. But obviously 12 issues of the Image anthology that they're writing to celebrate 30 years of Image Comics. A Town Called Terror, issue 1, which we were originally planning to have the writer Stephen Niles on the show to talk about the book, but unfortunately things just kind of didn't end up working out, which is why we did What's New only last week. Threw things off a little bit. Happens. But Joe, I know when you got the early look at this, you were all in.
The moment I looked at it, it was an immediate yes. And that's what's the first few pages having no dialogue. It was just
True.
Now I'm going to say the name, and I'm either right or I'm terribly wrong.
Yeah.
So I forever have just pronounced his name as Sisman Kodransky, but I believe it's probably Simon Kodransky. You know, a nice soft Z there.
Probably
right. But
yeah, but I've said
Kodransky's
Seisman too. So like that's that's the big loss out of not having Steve Niles on the show more than anything.
But Kodransky's art in this right off the rip is fantastic. And so the first 2 pages, I think, are just dialogue free. Which I think we're starting to see a little bit more of. Like, you know, we're getting these books where the artists are really allowed to tell the story without, you know, there being a lot of narration or a lot of dialogue sort of taking away from, and it really sets the stage. So what we have here is a horror book, but also I feel like we're going to get a bit of a crime story in here as well. And the moment I saw the art, I said, we got to do it. And then I read it, and it was like, oh, we definitely.
Yeah. This was an awesome first issue. And for those wondering, like, if Kodransky's name sounds familiar, you know, of course, done a lot of stuff, done Nita Hawes' Nightmare blog, which we'll talk about in a second. He's doing that right now as well. So busy man. But we also, what was it? Lonesome Days, Savage Night, which Niles also was a co-writer on that one. So we've seen them work together in the past. Of course, Kodransky's art style is very distinct. I know with Nita Hawes, there's more colors involved, but he thrives in black and white and then kind of just mixing in red, which we see that here in A Town Called Terror. And it's like blood red, whereas like with Lonesome Days, Savage Nights was a little bit more like maroon, if I remember correctly. But yeah, some really awesome shit from these two. There's like a very intimate scene that we see in this first issue of A Town Called Terror, and I don't know what it was, but maybe it was the curtains and the way they were like blowing and like the overview that we had, but it just felt like you know how like in Sin City, like the movie Sin City, where like they have I forget the Mickey Rourke's character's name, but he has the he's having sex with Goldie, and like there's like the music, like the saxophone playing in the background and everything like that. It has that kind of vibe to it for me, and I don't know why it just hit me in the right spot where it's just like this is some messed up shit, and then we got this like weird romantic scene going on. All right. Okay.
Yeah. Well, the fucked up shit in the beginning there with all the body parts and all that, like that was,
yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a good first issue. Very excited to see what Niles and Kodransky do going forward. But speaking of Kodransky too, we got to talk about the other book that he drew for this week, Nita Hawes' Nightmare blog issue 6, the end of the first arc. Joe, what'd you think?
Oh, it was absolutely tremendous. What a friggin' banger this ended up on, and it was a great finish. You know, I love what Barnes has done with this story is that, you know, he's, you know, there's a letter that or is an afterword that he wrote at the end of this issue. And that's, I think, very important to read because he sort of, I think he encapsulated what this series is about. He's like, you know, Nita's first case is done. There's more. So like each arc is going to be its own case, which is going to be great. And it's still, you know, with the mention of Jimmy Sangster, you know, there's still going to be some of that tie-in to Philadelphia. And maybe we'll see a little bit more crossover. But I just love that idea. Like, you know, this case was it was wrapped up perfectly, but it still just sets the stage for so much more chaos to ensue from here.
The big thing for me coming out of this is just like how he wrote Hal and Henry. I mean,
Yes.
like Nita's great, and her brother is good, and I mean, and Anansi, which if you're, you should know by now, Anansi gets mixed in, and that's where the big crossover. Aside from the mention of Jimmy Sangster,
Right.
that's the big crossover between the two titles in this series. And man, it was like Anansi's a real tick.
Yeah.
But the Howland Henry story, the way that Rodney writes villains is like in
He
this
might be
era,
one
it's
of my favorite villains in recent memory. He was just so vicious
so
and
vicious.
so he was perfect. He was just perfect.
But at the same time, like, man, if there's someone where you look at it, like if there's a villain, you look at a character and be like, yeah, I don't blame you for being the
Yeah,
way
I
you are
get it.
now. Yeah,
100%.
like you
100%.
are you really a piece of shit? Like, I don't think so, man. You're not like you're doing some pretty fucked up stuff, but you're not you got screwed over real
I get
bad.
you. I feel you. I get
Yeah.
you, you know?
Yeah. So it's like a very interesting character. Very excited to see the next villain that Rodney has in store for us. And of course
Yes.
with Philadelphia too, done some awesome stuff with whether it's John Adams, Abigail Adams. We've talked about how
George fucking Washington.
yep, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Jupiter, all these characters, like how he turned them into villains, and what he's done with them. It's been really, really
Yeah.
good. So, but Needle Hawes, like, still, like I love what they're doing with Washington right now in Philadelphia, but Needle Hawes still just a step ahead for me personally. But both of them, Rodney's been killing. Of course, we don't talk about this because like the crossover element, like we don't talk about sports on here as much. But Rodney, his show on HBO, Winning Time, has been
Been
killing
killing it.
or
Yeah.
loving it. So really happy for him. I might wait till the end and then binge it, but just glad to hear that he's kicking ass with this. I'm definitely going to watch it at some point.
If you follow him on Instagram, it's great because he's been posting pictures of him as I guess he's like a bouncer
Yeah,
at the
I saw
forum
that.
or what, so it's just great. He looks tremendous. It's absolutely fantastic. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna binge it all, you know,
Yeah.
uh, because that's what I like to do. I want to be able to binge.
I think they're doing a podcast for it too, I think, and I know Snoop Dogg was on it, and
Oh, I
it
gotta
was
listen to that.
yeah. I might wait till watching the show and then go back and listen to it. But the clip that he shared was some pretty good stuff.
Oh, that's great,
But
man. I wonder if Snoop Dogg reads comics. Maybe we can get Snoop on here.
oh yeah, there you go. I mean, dude, you'd be surprised at how many people like do. I mean, it's obviously we're seeing different people writing it, but they don't always necessarily read them. But it is wild how many people in the
Yeah.
creative side of it. But anyways, we move over to Boom because we want to get to Crimson Cage, but we got a Boom book that we got to talk about a little bit too. Of course, Mighty Morphin 18 out this week, but the big one is Seven Secrets issue 16. We're inching closer to the finale of this series, Joe. What'd you think of what's before penultimate? I don't know, the pre-penultimate issue?
The pre-penultimate, yeah. I think I sent you 4 eyeball emojis.
I think so.
Wide eye,
Yep.
because I was like, "Did you read this yet?" You're like, "Did I fucking read this yet?"
Yeah.
Holy shit, man! I mean, we know it's coming to an end, and it's this last arc has been wild from the onset, and it just gets more and more wild. And this issue in particular, just the way it ended was, it was a jaw dropping, moment. And you sort of asked me like, what do you think's going to happen? I'm like, well, but who knows, right? I
Yeah,
share with you how I felt, but I'm not confident in that.
that's the thing, and I actually am going to talk about it in the book I'm talking about today from Image. But that's the thing about this book that's been, especially this arc, that's been so impressive. Like Tom Taylor and Daniel DiNiculo tell us a big thing that's going to happen with one of the most important characters in the story, like right at the beginning of this arc.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, like this is going to happen, but like before we get there, and it's like, wait a minute. This is a huge ass thing you're telling us on like the first page or something to that end. Like that's a big show of confidence. That means like, you got everybody like right where you want them to, or where you want to. And it's just, and the art of course has been outstanding in this series. It's just getting better and better.
They told us, I still didn't see it coming.
Yeah. So it's just, it's crazy what's going on. In this, and there's just like, you think one thing's going to happen. There's just so many surprises. Like that's the thing with Taylor. Like he is so good at lulling you into like thinking a certain way, not necessarily comfort, because at this point we know not to get comfortable with Tom Taylor, but he knows how to make you think a certain way. And even where you might suspect something that's like, okay, he's doing this, but he's really trying to do that. Not necessarily.
Yeah.
So he's been, he's in the zone, and Daniel DiNiculo stuff. Like where we've talked about how awesome his art is, they have to bounce around a lot from like an artistic standpoint. Dino Cool has to do a lot of shit because we're talking about like a fairy world and like demons and shit like that and,
Yeah.
and whatnot. And then you're like set in real life too. So there's a lot going on. So to be
Yeah.
able to bounce around that well and like not have the readers get taken out of the story, to me, that's not a small feat at all.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's not. And this is, like I said, he's he's a tremendous artist, and like that's a big part of the reason why I wanted to read. So when this book came out, I remember I read the first issue, and then you called dibs. But one of the things I remember when I read that first issue was the art. Like the art's got me in,
Mm.
the story's got me in, and I think like this type of world, this type of story, is like it's perfect for him. That's why I thought like get him out of Radiant Black, let him do a shit ton of Radiant Black chicks. I
Yeah.
think he would fucking kill it.
I can't wait for more Shift stuff. I would love this if even if they did like a Shift solo title, I'd be interested in that. After what we've seen so far from the character, and you're gonna like the origin too. You
Oh,
really are.
nice.
Okay, let me fly through these other ones. So we got Dark Horse, Radio Spaceman issue 2, Last Flight Out issue 6, the final issue of that. So I'm
Hmm.
waiting to hear you circle back on that one next week. We got Daisy issue 5 and Breakout issue 1 from AWA. We have the second issue of Hit
Can't
Me.
wait.
Absolutely loved this first issue. So
Yeah.
freaking good. Dynamite, Immortal Red Sonja, issue 1. Valiant, the final issue of Shadowman. So we'll be circling back on that one next episode of TLDR because we don't get early access to Valiant, unfortunately. Aftershock, we got Midnight Rose, issue 1. Vault, The Rush, The Last Book You'll Ever Read, issue 7. Human Remains, issue 7. And We Ride Titans, issue 3. And that brings us to the book you're talking about this week, Joe. Please take it away.
All right. So, I mean, as I stated at the top of the show, um, I am reading The Crimson Cage from AWA Studios. This was written by John Lees. Artist is Alex Cormack. Colors, Ashley Cormack. Letters by Hassan Atmani El How.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Hassan Astamani Elhau. I think you're right.
Yeah. All right. And man, they talk about a book that's right in my wheelhouse. Um, so it's 5 issues with the 5th issue, by the time you're listening to this, if you're listening right off the rip, it comes out next week. But 5 issues, so 4 is out currently. And man, this is, like I said, it's like 2 of the things that I love the most, right?
Mm.
I love comics, I love wrestling, and it is a perfect merge, of the 2.
Mhm.
So quick synopsis. New Orleans, 1984. Chuck Frenzy is the main event star at the local Louisiana pro wrestling territory, but yearns for something greater. A fateful encounter with a trio of terrifying beings in the bayou gives Chuck a glimpse of championship glory beyond his wildest dreams, if he is willing to do something terrible to achieve it.
Okay.
So, this is Macbeth
Mhm.
in comic book form with a wrestling setting, and it is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Like like Macbeth has been adapted, 1,000 different ways, which
Mhm.
is this tells you a little something about our good friend Bill Shakespeare, right? I
Mm.
mean, like his stories have lasted for fucking how long now,
Yes. Known,
right?
is it Monster Hunter? Is that what he is in Once in Future? Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Something to that
right.
end.
But like here we are, it's 2022. And we're still talking about the guy and his stories and adapting them in different ways. And John Lees just knocks it out of the park here. And it was funny because as I'm reading this, and I wrote a review for Geeks Worldwide for the first issue, and I believe if I can recall correctly, it's like Shakespeare is almost like perfect for professional wrestling,
Hmm.
right? Because for those of us, Nick, that enjoy wrestling, it's not so much about uh, the personalities or the sport of it, because we all know that it's a predetermined outcome, right? But we still watch, we still enjoy because there's great storytelling that's happening both in the ring and out of the ring, right? So wrestling it's just another form of storytelling,
That's
and when
fair. I,
it's
I will say that is fair because Becky Lynch and her story and everything, and also character development with her too. She is why I gave wrestling a chance. Like as a kid, didn't like it, and then I gave it a chance as an adult because I thought she was a badass. Still do, but like like I've said, like some of it just I get taken out of.
when
Anyways.
you have the right characters, the right personalities, and the right storyline, like you just get sucked in. Like for me, I watched as a kid, didn't watch for a while, and then it was the Attitude Era that brought me back in. It was Stone Cold Steve Austin, it was The
Mm,
Rock, it was DX, it's Chris Jericho, right? It's like the stories that surrounded those characters, like it made it must watch every week. Soap opera for men, right? It's why we read comic books, it's why we watch movies, it's why we watch TV shows. Like we get addicted to, as PCP would say, we get addicted to the content,
mm,
and and you just fall in love with it. And so you take a story like Macbeth,
mhm,
and if you can find a way to bring it into the wrestling world, you really got something there. So what we have here with Crimson Cage is we've got action, you get horror, and you've got suspense. Like, so for me, like, you don't have to be a wrestling fan to enjoy this book. This is a really good story that takes place in a wrestling sort of setting.
mhm.
But the horror elements that you get, the action that you get, the suspense that you get, it is a page turner. Like you're just flying through the pages. You're
Hmm.
whipping through. And I think that's
Horror,
what.
huh? Okay,
Yeah. Well, I mean, Macbeth has horror elements to it, right?
that's fair. Yeah.
And so, like, when you're dealing with the witches or the supernatural beings, of the bayou in this case, right? That combined with Alex Cormac's art, right? It's very vicious. It's very horrifying, and the element to it, and then it's like I said, you've got this wrestling setting as a background, and like for the wrestling fan, it's awesome, but for the non-wrestling fan, I think you would enjoy it very much.
That's the big thing that I need to hear. Yep. Okay.
Yep. So with Macbeth, right? You've got it's about a Scottish general who encounters three witches who sort of prophesize that one day he will become king. So you've got
Mhm.
ambition, you've got this prophecy, and you've got his old lady, right? Sort of needling, egging him on, telling him to fulfill his prophecy, to become king. And so Macbeth takes action, and it was he puts it in his own hands. He kills the king, takes over the throne, and then it's sort of this descent into madness, right? Where then he keeps killing to sort of make sure that he kind of stays in power, to hide, his previous crime and all that. And then, eventually, you know, you know, guilt and madness overtake him, and he dies, right? And, hence it's called the tragedy of Macbeth, right? You've got
Mhm.
this
That's true.
this ascension into power, but then once you get there, it ultimately drives you mad, and the outcome is less than to be desired. And so with the Crimson Cage, we I mean it is, when I say it's an on the nose retelling, it is an on the nose retelling, and that's not to diminish anything.
Hmm.
It's just it's such a perfect setting for professional wrestling,
Hmm.
and that story of you got an a wrestler that's wrestling in indie circuits, which if you know anything about professional wrestling, especially in the 80s, and that's sort of the vibe of the Crimson Cage and sort of the era in which this story is taking place, that sort of late 70s 1980s era of wrestling, where you're starting to get these really big lavish over the top personalities, but it's still set in a world where you've got these different wrestling territories where you don't have the one big like WWE you have now,
Mhm.
but you've got these different wrestling territories. Some are small potatoes, some are bigger than others, right? The ones that are bigger than others, those are the ones that I think that become what the WWE is. But you've got these sort of small time indie wrestling promotions, and in this story, it's Louisiana Pro Wrestling, and our main character is Chuck Frenzy, and he's sort of the big dog there. But being the big dog there is still being a very small fish in a
Mm.
ginormous fucking pond.
Okay.
And he desires to be more. He wants to be the champion. He wants to, as any wrestler does, they want to get to that next level. And he's got his companion, Charlene, his wife, who is his manager. Don't call her a valet. His manager,
Okay.
and she, is Lady Macbeth. She's, tell in his ear, you got to ditch this dump. You got to do what it takes to get to the next level. So, like,
Hmm.
you've got a lot of that, sort of, Macbeth, vibes, going on. And so, you've got that ambition and that drive. And so what happens in this story, and this all happens in the first issue, so this isn't spoiling anything,
Okay.
is that this is what sucked me in, is that you're learning about Chuck and his manager, Charlene, and so what happens is he's wrestling, and you get there's going to be a big event, in town, and it's going to feature one of the top dogs from one of the bigger promotions. His name's Van Emerald. And when I only have to say one person's name, is this who Van Emerald is? He is 100% Ric Flair.
Okay.
Looks and personality, like he just comes in styling, profiling, and he's coming in, and he's setting up a big match with Chuck Frenzy. This is going to help Chuck sort of ascend, like it's gonna be a big match for him. And for Van Emerald, it's just another thing.
Yeah.
And so what happens throughout this first issue is you've got Van Emerald sort of, he's just pumping Chuck's tires, pumping him up. He's like, you're going to be the next big thing, kid. You're going to be the next big thing. This is what we're going to do in the ring. I'm going to put you over, right? Which is a wrestling term saying I'm going to make you shine. I'm going to let you, take the spotlight here.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so you get that through that first issue, and then Chuck is drinking at a bar with one of his buddies, and he's kind of drunk. He's stumbling home, and he's in the bayou, and he encounters witches who prophesize, you will be the champion one day. But the means to get there, sometimes you got to cause a little destruction and chaos to achieve what you want. And that's that foreshadowing, right? Again, that Macbeth style foreshadowing that we get. And then at the end of the first issue, what Van Emerald does to Chuck Frenzy, it's just quintessential. My daughter's here, so I can't say what I want to say. Quintessential F you.
Yeah.
And it is so good the way that Lee's, writes the character and writes that storyline, because as soon as that first issue ends, again, you want the second issue. I mean, it does its job perfectly. It tells you in the synopsis that it's Macbeth, so you kind of know what to expect. But it's so good; it draws you in. The action, the art, like the wrestling scenes in this. There's a scene. There's some panels where Chuck Frenzy is wrestling. Oh shit! I'm blanking on the other wrestler's name, but it's like they're going through, and when you watch wrestling on TV, there's a lot of stuff that you don't see, but like knowing how it works, like there's times like when they're grappling, the wrestlers will talk to each other, say, okay, we're going to do this next, we're going to do that next. Or when a wrestler's down and out, he'll like razor blade himself, like to get the blood. So like you see that, like John Lee's obviously is a fan of professional wrestling, has been watching it for some time, because he incorporates all those little details in this. And but the art, the viciousness of, like, you see like when Chuck cuts himself to get the blood, and just the action sequences, it's so good. But then like the horror elements from the bayou and from the witches of the bayou, like it gets horrifying, it gets vicious, and it's just so good. And I have the wonderful knowledge of knowing how it ends, but can't share with you. And the way he wraps it up is so good. And like I said, it's Macbeth on the nose, but like for professional wrestling, it fits perfectly. Perfectly.
So when you're talking to, so you've sold me on it, not a surprise. But when you talk about a wrestling books, like obviously you've read some other ones over the years. And to me, like you've talked to me about some of them, and I touched on them a little bit, but this is the first one where I'm like, okay, I want to give this one a shot. And I'm more curious than anything when it comes when you're talking to like another wrestling fan, especially like if you were to talk to a wrestling fan like Rossi doesn't read comics, right? Okay, of course, for those who don't know, friend of the show, Jason Rossi over on the Pop Culture Pile Driver. I forget who he co-hosts that with, but I think that guy's an asshole if I remember correctly.
Oh, anyways, you keep my podcaster's name out your mouth.
Well, you're drawing a line stand now. Okay, good to know. Anyways, if you were talking to Rossi, would this be like number one, number two in terms of like, hey, you like wrestling? If you wanted to ever look into comics, this is a good place for you to start. Would this be the number one or number two?
So for him, I would say read this book. Yeah, go read it right now. Like, because again, it's got that sort of inside baseball, right?
Mm,
But it's not like, oh, if you don't know wrestling, you won't get it and you'll feel
right.
lost, sort of thing. But
Mhm.
it's like it's a nice little nod to those wrestling fans that do know. Like, oh yeah, like he just nails like the little details,
So I'll just
perfectly.
enjoy. You think someone like me, will just enjoy it, but someone like a Rossi or maybe even like Rich or someone like that, they're
I
gonna
think
love it because they love wrestling.
I think the wrestling fan um, will love this book.
Mm.
Like they'll really love it. And
Hmm.
I think for someone like you, the non-wrestling fan, but as a comic book reader, you'll love it
Mm.
because it's a great story. The art's great, and it goes from point A to point B so well, right? Like
Okay.
again, I wouldn't call this a wrestling comic book. I
Mm.
would call this a comic book that has a wrestling setting,
Got
if
it.
that makes sense, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, you know, all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskeys are bourbon, right?
Yeah.
Sort of thing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, but it's just I don't know because it's got
Those are
all
the
those
best
elements
stories
to it.
though. Like when it's like it had yes, like it's about this thing, like this larger thing, but in the end it's like more about like another topic, another issue. This is just kind of like that the wrestling is more the vehicle, if
Yeah,
you will. Yeah.
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 And like I said, like professional wrestling lends itself to great storytelling, and for some reason, like you can probably take all of Billy Shakespeare's works and adapt them to wrestling in some way. You really could. It's kind of amazing when you think about it. But like this story in particular, when you take a look at like Stone Cold Steve Austin, for example, real quick, and I'll let you talk about your book. Is that
Oh, thanks.
no, I'm a good guy. I watched the Stone Cold A&E biography not too long ago, and from a period of like 1996, 1997 until 2001, 2002, he was the guy. He
Mhm.
was the biggest name in professional wrestling. It was Stone Cold versus McMahon, Stone Cold versus The Rock, Stone Cold. I mean, it was Stone Cold. And he said something that was very interesting because, again, to learn of Stone Cold Steve Austin, that he started, in the Indies, struggling to sort of make it. He was in WCW again, and then by the time he gets to WWE, he's a lot further along in his career, but hasn't really ascended to something, big time. And then he just sort of caught fire, at King of the Ring, and he drops that Stone Cold, 316 means I just whooped your ass, or I'm blanking, but
Yep.
like that was like his launching pad. It just takes a moment,
Mm.
right? And boom, and he gets to the top. And one of the things that he says is that even though I'm at the top, I'm paraphrasing here, like I have to keep going. I can't stop because the moment I stop, the moment I lose even a fraction of luster, that's it. It can all be taken away.
Mhm.
And the next big guy is right there, always breathing on your neck,
Mhm.
right? And so, like the sacrifices that he made, like it cost him his relationship with his family, right? It cost him
Didn't know
a
that.
lot,
Hmm.
but he said, he wouldn't change a thing. Like that's the sacrifice he was willing to make to not only get to the top, but to
But
stay at the top, right?
yeah.
And so, like that's Macbeth too, right? Like
Mm. That's true.
your
Yeah.
ambition to ascend to power and then to do whatever it takes to stay there,
Mhm.
right? And then like the downfall that can happen afterwards, depending on what you had to do to get there and stay there. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
just tremendous.
Okay. Well, you couldn't have sold this any better, and you needed to big time for me just because of the wrestling backdrop. But I will absolutely be giving this a look. Of course, John Lee's also wrote Hotel or writes Hotel, which we've
Yeah.
been really enjoying the second volume of that. I think the final issue of that comes out later this month as well. So big month for him
Hmm.
for sure. But now it's time to pivot into Image, which because my book is from Image this week that we're talking about, that I'm talking about. Excuse me, I'm talking about the Reckless books from Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Colorist on this is also Jacob Phillips, who is Sean Phillips' son. Who Jacob Phillips, that name may ring a bell for you guys if you listen to our interviews mainly, because we had Chip Zdarsky on a while back, and Newburn, Jacob Phillips is the artist on that series. And I believe he also does the colors as well. And actually, Sean and Jacob Phillips have a pretty similar art style, I would say. There's definitely like they're not carbon copies of one another, but it feels very like when I found out, okay, yeah, like it's his dad. Like I didn't actually know that at the time. Like, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, The Reckless books are a little bit different, where Joe's talking about Crimson Cage, which is a 5-issue story. A lot of these other books we talk about maybe ongoing titles, or sometimes it's like, this is a set amount of issues to a story, and that's going to be it. Maybe more than 5 issues. The Reckless books are just straight up graphic novels, and they're kind of, they're not exactly anthologies, but none of the stories, like, you can read one story without the other. But you lose a little bit of the background on the character. That's really about it. That said, these are all friggin' awesome. So we get 4 graphic novels. The 4th one is out this week, which is why I'm talking about it now. The first 3, you can go purchase them all. They're also available on Hoopla if you want to go that route. But of course, we always want to support the creators as best we can throughout all, just in general. But if you want to take that first one, Reckless is the first one, and give it a look there by all means. Then there's Friend of the Devil. And then we have Destroy All Monsters. And then the newest one this week is The Ghost in You, which The Ghost in You I have yet to read. And I'm not going to get into the third one, because I do know there's a slight change for what's happening in The Ghost in You. It's just, I think, a creative decision in the end. But anyways, so as I mentioned, these are their own thing. I'll give you the synopsis for actually the first 2, because they're a little bit different. If you're watching us instead of listening to us in an audio form solely, you can see the 2 covers for the first 2 graphic novels. All 4 books are set in LA in the 80s. The newest one is in 89, and the first one is in 81. The synopsis for the first one: sex, drugs, and murder in 1980s Los Angeles, and the best new twist on paperback pulp heroes since The Punisher or Jack Reacher. Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, the modern masters of crime noir, which they've done a ton of stuff together. There is another series from them that I will talk about, at least one other series from them I'll talk about on here. Bring us the latest, the last thing anyone expects from them: A Good Guy, a bold new series of original graphic novels with 3 books releasing over the next year. Okay, either I fast forward a little bit. Meet Ethan Reckless. Your trouble is his business for the right price. But when a fugitive from his radical student days reaches out for help, Ethan must face the only thing he fears: his own past. I texted you about this series a little while back. Of course, it's been around for a few years now. I read this. We were like, Lauren and I were visiting her family one weekend, and I was just, I just got, I work remotely, so I can kind of work from wherever. I just gotten off work and, working nights, but I was like, I'm not ready to go to bed yet. So I went on Hoopla and I saw that this was on there, and I'd wanted to read these, and I had a tough time tracking these down for a while. I don't know why. These are awesome books, obviously. I read this first one, Joe. I almost read it that first night. Like, it was midnight when I started it. I almost read the whole thing in that night, woke up early the next morning, finished the first issue. You are just as fast a reader as I am, I think. You'll read this in 1 to 2 days, like minimum, like it's like, or maximum. Like it's crazy. Like, and I think anybody who gives this a shot is going to absolutely love these books. Like they're for everybody. And as long as you like a little bit of crime stuff, a little bit of investigation. Synopsis of the second one, a little more abbreviated. It's 1985, so a few years later down the line. And things in Ethan's life are going pretty well until a missing woman shows up in the background of an old B movie, and Ethan is drawn into Hollywood's secret occult underbelly as he hunts for her among the wreckage of the wild days of the 70s. So again, taking this character, just putting him in a different circumstance, a little more background on Ethan. So Ethan Reckless is a private eye investigator, formerly of the FBI, then distanced himself from them. And what we can clearly see with this character is he learned, he was targeted to be in the FBI because his father was like a naval captain or something to that end. So they wanted someone who's like, okay, military kid and everything, we can trust him. But clearly this guy is one smart dude. And the narration through the story is him actually telling somebody the story, like present day, effectively. Like he's talking about the story right now. But it doesn't feel like it's a good balance of like, I'm recalling everything that happened, but also being in the moment with the panels, which I think is a hard thing to bounce around with. But also at the same time, like when I realize that the narration is the story being told to somebody else, for me, that just hits a little bit better than like inner monologue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then the only other character who we see from book to book is Anna. I think there's one other character we see pop up a couple times, but he has a minor role. But Anna, she is Ethan Reckless's assistant. She's actually going to be at the center of the focus of the one coming out this week. They get more into her background story in the third issue, but she's basically the one taking all the calls for his possible cases that he would end up taking. And what's interesting, we talked about with Seven Secrets, right, where Tom Taylor will start a story, and then with the recent arc of Seven Secrets, right, he started with like this big reveal with one of the main characters of the story, and then kind of goes like, oh no, we need to get back over here. With each of these Reckless books, at least through the first three, that is along the lines of what Brubaker and Phillips do here. They start off like very late in the story, and then like it's just a few pages of that give you an idea what's going on there, and then let's start from the beginning of where like this story kind of really began. And again, to me, that exudes confidence. Like you know what you're doing, you know like how to like get the reader hooked and everything, and not give too much away, and you're not reliant on some of these like details that you would think would be really important late, and you can also mislead us in some ways, which there's obviously a lot of misdirection throughout this story. But as for the art and all this, look, like Sean Phillips, and same thing with Jacob Phillips, right? Like this is nothing like, it's not like this mind-bending stuff that we see sometimes. It's not like flashy like Mora or John Boyd. It's not like horror stuff like what you talk about and everything. It's like, it's consistent though. It is clean. And for me, like it has like a simple feel to it in this story. And that's what you want. Like this is set in real life. There are not these supernatural elements to this story. This is like a pulp crime book. And it is like it's self-contained and everything, but kind of aware of the world around it and the setting. And it's watercolors too, or at least watercolor-like for the colors.
I love that.
Which fits in perfectly for this kind of story and the setting and everything. So the art, of course, with this fits very well. And we've seen Brubaker, and like he can adjust. Like what was the Kill or Be Killed? That's another book I think I'm going to talk about on this show at some point. That's Sean Phillips and Ed Brubaker as well. So like similar, but obviously because the same guy. But there are definitely some clear differences. And one thing that really jumps out to me that I did want to mention. They're like what Ethan Reckless looks like or what Anna looks like in some of these characters throughout the story. But it's funny, there'll be times where Sean Phillips will draw something and it's just like it feels like unfinished or vague or whatever, as if to like tell readers like very subtly like this is happening, but it's really not that important. Like don't get too caught up in this particular moment that's happening on this panel. And I like that. Like it's sometimes like where it makes other panels feel more important. It kind of gives you a break, allows you to focus on like the narration or the dialogue, whatever's going on. So like awesome, very fitting art for this story. Awesome story in general. And I'm telling you, like anybody who picks these up, you are gonna crush these things.
I love Brubaker because he reminds me of Dashiell Hammett, and he, those sort of crime noir stories, those crime noir settings, like Brubaker kills it, and you get those vibes when we read Newburn, right? And like, so I definitely want to read this because this is right up my alley, and because I love stories like that. I love that setting, like the Maltese Falcon and L.A. Confidential and those old, L.A. Confidential's on old movie, oldish, but like Maltese Falcon's real old. But like, you know what I mean? Just those noir setting,
Didn't Chip say that he talked to Brubaker about Newburn when he was writing it at first or coming up with it?
Well, yeah, because they're pretty good pals, I think. Because I mentioned it because I said Newburn's got a Brubaker feel to it.
Yeah,
and he's like, oh well, brag, name dropped and
yes, I think he actually said that too.
Right, and with because I think Sean Phillips is the artist on Newburn.
No, Jacob Phillips is
Jacob Phillips. Yeah, right.
Yes.
Right. So I mean, obviously, like there's a connection there, there's a friendship there. So like, but I love those kinds of stories, and I love that setting, and so this definitely sounds like a
this is one I've wanted to read for a long time too. Like by the time I gotten it, it's like I just looked for it and I just could never like the apprehension. And this is one of like our focuses on this show too, right? We try to help our readers figure out where to begin on stuff, where you like what you can look into, what's the first thing. And like that was one thing that was kind of hard for me with Reckless originally, just because like I'm like, okay, which is like I was late to the game on it, and so okay, which one's the first one? And some say a Reckless book, and then this one says Reckless. The first one is Reckless. And I like, while you can enjoy all the stories without reading the first one, read the first one. You're going to love it. The second one is awesome too. And that for me, like when you're talking about like occult type stuff, like that's always very interesting. Again, not supernatural. It's just like real, like what we deal with in real life. As much as, there may be some supernatural things that happen, it's more like devil worshiping and all that kind of craziness. So really enjoyed all of these. Cannot wait to sink my teeth into The Ghost in You. But yeah, so Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, read the Reckless books. And I hope the fourth one is not the end for them, because they could keep going with this shit. It's really, really freaking good.
When I was looking up to do art, get the art for Instagram, and I was reading about it, it sounded like they only had 3 planned initially.
But and I think
so
you're right.
Now they got a 4th one coming out, so maybe they got a couple more, that they're going to be working on.
Yeah, I think it was in the 3 books releasing. Yeah, when we talked about the first synopsis. Yeah, it makes that. I think you're right. And this shit kicks ass, and they could keep doing more and more. And honestly, like they're just doing stuff in the 80s, and I know they're moving chronologically with this. And this one being, this new one being in 89, you can go back to the 70s, and you could still do some stuff with Reckless as well. Like you're not going to have Anna necessarily and all that stuff, but you like he's been center stage up until like the 3rd one. We get to see more of Anna. Still at center stage, Reckless is in that one, but you could go into the 70s and do some of his FBI stuff, and whatnot. This series has been great, and it's just going to keep getting better and better. And it's all just binge stuff for those people who don't want to do like the week-to-week comic stuff like Joe and I do, or like Joe does when it comes to shows. It's just coming out, and this is in hardcover form. I know we want to make for paperback. I wouldn't wait. Just get this right away in hardcover form. It's friggin' awesome.
Nice.
So this week we are not going to be doing the Failed Superhero Club stuff because we're running a little bit long, and it happens. And Joe's, of course, not feeling well, so I'm trying to be a considerate friend because, we look at that on the show. We know who the more considerate one is of the two of us. Either way, until next week, Joe, stay sexy.
You know it.